financing. And I think when it comes to the core, the national allocations are critical to building resilience, especially in the development space. So the aim of today's session is really to focus on how we can ensure that disaster risk reduction is fully integrated into the national and local physical planning processes. And we all understand that the stakes are incredibly high in our region. The Pacific Asia region is particularly vulnerable to the different risks, the different vulnerabilities, but not only that, but the number of people that are exposed to these kind of risks. And as we move towards 2030 and beyond, the predictions are that the increasing cost of disaster will just continue to increase exponentially. It is crucial, therefore, that governments take a proactive steps to allocate resources that not only mitigate the risks, but also allow for effective disaster response when they do occur, and that there is future planning inbuilt into the systems. One of the key objectives of this session is to encourage dialogue on how national and local governments can increase public investments in DRR. Regular budget allocations must consider disaster risk as a core element of the allocation decisions. Just as we do our physical risk decisions around debt servicing, around liquidity, around managing fiscal constraints and prioritization. In the context of the region, this is particularly important in the case of local governments, where they are most usually are the entities required to face and respond to disasters when they do occur. Another major theme for today's discussions is the role of international financial institutions and how they can help governments, especially those with physical constraints and limited resources, in optimizing resource allocation for disaster risk management and prevention. IFIs have the potential to develop coherent and integrated frameworks that help countries close the physical gaps. And then we also have discussion around the tools that national governments can use to inform their budget decision-making, to do budget stress testing, and to ensure that there is return on investments based on the allocations. These tools allow governments to better anticipate the financial risks and financial impacts of disasters. Of course, we talk about disaster risk information. We also want to talk about data that it should help governments in their decision-making when it comes to budget allocations. So without further ado, please, I want you to join me in welcoming our panelists for this afternoon. First, on my immediate left, we have Mr. Penampan, who is the Deputy Director General of the Fiscal Policy Department for the Ministry of Finance from the People's Democratic Republic of Laos. Please put a hand together for Mr. Penampan, please. Next to him, we have Ms. Miriama Kedendroma from the Ministry of Finance of Fiji from the Budget Division. Then next to her, we have Mr. Toru Kubo, Senior Director of the Asian Development Bank. And of course, right at the end, we have the Honorable Amina Pangandaman, the Secretary from the Department of the Budget and Management for the Government of the Philippines. Thank you, Madam. Because you have all been very patient, I'm going to go straight into the questioning. So we're going to start with the Director General of the Fiscal Policy Department from the Ministry of Finance, Laos. Laos faces significant climate and disaster risks. How does the Ministry of Finance ensure that disaster risk is incorporated into physical risk assessments, particularly when balancing other critical physical priorities? What have been the key challenges in ensuring disaster risk reduction is fully integrated into physical policies? So.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey, and also distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is my great pleasure to be invited to speak at these working sessions. Very important issues. May I firstly express my sincere thanks to UNDRR and also the Authority of Philippines for excellent arrangement for this meeting. Let's me firstly touch on the fiscal planning context in Laos and how we incorporate the disaster risk in the fiscal risk assessment. In Laos, we introduced the medium-term fiscal policy framework 21-25, and we are now trying to plan the fiscal planning in the 5-year plan and also 3 years and annual plan. So the fiscal planning process or mechanism, we have 5-year plan and also 3 years and annual. So this is a new fiscal planning practice that we introduced from 21 and 25. So it's a new practice. This allows the Ministry of Finance to assess different risks. Especially we work on assessing macroeconomic risks in 5 years and also in the medium term and also annually. And our fiscal planning process or fiscal framework needs to base on the national 5 years social development plan. And we need to base on the priorities, objective, and work plan. So in the 9 5-year development, social development plan 21 to 25, we focus on also on the balancing the development priorities, the economic, social, and environmental priorities, which focus on also on the green growth strategies and also on the climate adaptations and also reduction of disaster risk. And in incorporating the risk, we, as I mentioned, we assess the macroeconomic risk, especially the GDP growth, which reflect more or less the risk that will have impacts on the GDP growth, on agriculture, and on industry, on services. So this will also be input in our fiscal planning. And second one I mentioned is the 5-year fiscal planning. So as the national disaster risk has become increased risk to the budget and also to social and economic aspect, we try to incorporate as much as possible in our planning process by working with Ministry of Planning and Investment on the investment project expenditures, investment expenditures, and also line ministries and also local governments in preparing the expenditures plan. And from this framework, we have successfully developed the financing mechanisms in our budget. For example, we allocate contingency fund and also reserve fund for emergency purpose. And we also work with Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare to have special fund for social welfare fund and also the disaster management funds. Moreover, we also work in the regional corporations for the ASEAN disaster risk, catastrophic insurance facilities. So I think Laos are the first members working with all the ASEAN members to establish these facilities. And also we buy this kind of facility in order to manage the risk from flooding or national disaster. Third one, I think we also set up the national the Disaster Management Committee in Laos. And I think it's very working very well organized committee in the central and local levels. And what are the challenges that we, for the incorporating the disaster risk into our fiscal policy? I can mention about 4. Firstly, in the fiscal space, because the priorities in the expenditures, the government expenditure is very, we have to allocate well and ensure that the money, the budget have been well spent. So I think we need to work more with the line ministries, especially with the Ministry of Planning and Investment, to ensure that our investment expenditure is very well programmed and well implemented with transparency. So, and also we have a lack of financial instruments like bond markets or insurance markets. And third one is data. I think we still lack data on the national disaster risk in the local context. I think from local to central, and I think is one of the issue. And the third one is monitoring of mechanism about the budget disbursement. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Some really important and I think innovative ways that you allow us is approaching it. Obviously, the short-term, medium-term physical frameworks and the planning linked to the national development plans. I heard you mention about the specific sector protection mechanisms, and of course you have the contingency funds and the reserves, and also tapping into specific disaster risk financing instruments, for example, the parametric insurance. You mentioned something about the link between local governments and central governments. I'll come back to you on that one. But you also mentioned the importance of data. And I think that's a good segue to move into our next question. I'm going to come to you, Director Toru. From ADB's perspective, what are the key challenges that prevents countries from integrating risk-informed information and data into physical planning? And how can the ADB assist countries to consider disaster risk in their physical planning and resource allocation? Please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lee, and thanks to everyone and organizers for having ADB. Really an honor to join this distinguished panel. I think the DDG from Laos has a great start. I think really mentioned about the barriers and challenges. But let me just sort of recap the points from where ADB and also IFIs. So on challenges and how ADB IFIs can assist. Now, first of all, disasters are contingent liabilities, right? So they're actually invisible to the Ministry of Finance, and oftentimes the Minister of Finance they need to respond after a disaster has happened. And of course, that's the mobilizing funds for recovery and also dealing with revenue shortfalls in severe disaster situations. The bad news, and we've heard throughout the week, is that the climate overlay, so the past is not a good indicator to predict the future. The scale of the impact, the fiscal impact, is actually growing. And your deputy section at the opening plenary shared some really alarming examples. In the Pacific, there were cases where one severe incident led to above 30% of the GDP. Another one was at 64% with 2 storms in 1 week and a minor earthquake. I mean, this really shakes the foundation of fiscal management and sustainability. And it's not only the Pacific countries, but really we're seeing the most vulnerable countries having this growing impact. Now, one of the challenges, the lack of the institutional mandates and fragmented responsibilities. So it's great to hear, really encouraging from Laos and ASEAN on the Ministry of Finance, together with the planning, really stepping up here. But on the climate risk assessments, it's primarily often Ministry of Environment. And for disaster risk assessment, it's the disaster risk authorities agencies. The Ministry of Finance really need to include the climate and disaster fiscal risk assessment into their core mandates. And that's not really the situation yet across the region. We have some great examples, and we have contributed to reports. We have a case study for the Philippines. I'm sure we'll hear from the Secretary. Armenia, Mongolia, we're happy to share that. Our whole team, expert team, is there. But it's really uneven across the region. So let me just highlight 3 strategies that ADB and IFIs are taking, and together with the partners for the selected developing member countries. So the first one is awareness, right, and knowledge and the analytics. Lee, you mentioned data. That's super important. There's so much of a gap in data availability. But first of all, awareness to collect that data and understanding where data is available, data is not available. The DDG mentioned about Ministry of Finance needing the tools to identify and the models, and also disclosing the climate disaster-related fiscal risks. Now, these macroeconomic shocks and the negative long-term economic consequences, right? So it's a vicious cycle. You have reduced revenue, you have increased spending, you have increased debt, and then you ultimately leads to credit rating downgrades, which then hits your bottom line. I mentioned about Armenia. They have started to integrate climate disaster risk into their macroeconomic models. And they carry out scenario analysis, stress testing to their fiscal health. Our host here, the Philippines, is really leading this as well, assesses and discloses climate risk in its fiscal statement. Right? So there are good examples, and while you're here, please talk and exchange these experiences. The data I mentioned, it's really weak. It's collected by multiple agencies. There needs to be coordination on data, and it's packaged and also delivered on time for the Ministry of Finance for their fiscal modeling. We heard about 5-year, 3-year annual cycles, but there's a timing of that, right? And there needs to be coordination. Oftentimes the data is not there and it's not on time. If we have time later, we can go into that, Lee, a bit more. But not just that, but really governments, and especially finance and budget, they need to see the evidence of cost effectiveness. Where is the best bang for the buck? And there's analysis that, for water, power, sanitation, transport sectors, and we heard in the opening plenary that $1 of investment leads to, $4 of return. And these comparative and what-if analyses, I think we need to make it more accessible. So we are, ADB, starting to really help to make digital tools accessible, like digital twins and open data platforms. So we can run these analyses and it crowds in and really measures helps the prioritization of the governments when making decisions. Now, let me just jump because of the time limitation. The second strategy is enabling environment, and these are institutional reforms. And ADB and IFIs, we support through policy-based lending. In World Bank, it's called development policy lending. And these are really governance. So first is, we need to strengthen the role of the committees. We just heard about these national disaster risk management committees. And the committees that govern the risk, and they will assign the risk holders to reduce, transfer, and also retain the risk and develop the strategy accordingly. Number 2, align the public investment management, so PIM frameworks to enable the line agencies, and I'll go into this, prioritize investments with climate and disaster resilience outcomes. Again, Philippines does this. It's a budget tagging, and they track the impact of these investments. So I'll just go into a little bit more the budget cycle. So one is budget preparation. It's really helping sectors to build in climate and disaster risk assessments at early stage of public investment. In the Philippines, it goes to the investment committee, and then with NEDA and others, the core design, it goes into the core design principles. So that's budget preparation. And let me just be clear, this is not an either or, right? it's actually delivering on the country's sector priorities, but understanding where it contributes to climate and disaster resilience the most. So it's co-benefits. It's delivering on those. Number two, budget authorization. Ensure that these committees understand the climate and disaster risks. So when they prioritize and make the decisions, they are maximizing. The number three, budget execution. Design effective disbursement mechanism and DRF instruments. We talked about the instruments. National Reserve Funds, contingent disaster finance, parametric insurance. Then finally, budget evaluation, track reporting and evaluating the impacts. Let me just pause here and then happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. There's so much to distill and also trying to extract out of those intervention. But really, I think your starting point around the disaster risk is actually a contingent liability. In other words, it's unseen. But the data helps us actually put into the forefront. When you see the data and you analyze it, then you actually start to get a picture of the risk there. And I think your last point about the co-benefits of risk-informed development and investment to inform the allocations. Before I go to the next panelist, just on that point, we had a discussion before around, unfortunately, some of the budget allocations are thought out in the cabinet rooms. And despite the availability of data, sometimes it's really the ministry that can push their case the most within the small walls of cabinets, get the most allocation. But we need to move away and use the data and the analysis to be able to actually have some sort of formula and allocation or in matrix on which the budget allocations are based that also not only talks about the risks, but also the returns on the investment. It sees it as an investment rather than a budget cost allocation. Noting that our last panelist is from a financial institution, international financial institution at that, I want to come to our panelist from Fiji, Ms. Miriama Kirindroma, and just ask from Fiji's perspective, how can international financial institutions better support small island developing states in managing disaster risk, especially in terms of closing the physical gaps and providing the necessary financial tools for disaster risk reduction? Over to you.
Thank you, Carlos. Excellencies, members of Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Bula Vinaka, and a good afternoon to you all. Firstly, I wish to acknowledge the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Government of the Republic of the Philippines for this opportunity. Now, to the question, Fiji is one of those many small island developing economies that is exposed to devastating impact of climate change, with increased frequency and intensity of natural disasters. Now, the irony is that while we are not responsible for creating this climate crisis, we have to bear the human, economic, and physical cost of climatic events. The cost of disaster response, including immediate relief, rehabilitation, and post-disaster construction, is huge. At the same time, the cost of climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction is substantial and chews away the already limited physical resources that we have. So Fiji, through the assistance of international financial institutions, has arranged the following. Number one, we have negotiated and secured a standby disaster loan facility of around $75 million, this is Fiji dollars, with Japan International Cooperation Agency last week. This is a second of such a facility. What this means is that we have a pre-negotiated concessional loan financing that will be released after a state of disaster is declared. The Fijian government does not have the capacity to hold such a huge, hold it there, yes, such a huge sum for disaster. I think most of you will be concurring on me with that. Given our limited resources, even though we have around 1 million Fijian dollar annually, like that's what we actually allocate every year, every financial year, to assist the disaster relief and response. That's from the government side. So this supplements government financing needs during disaster. Secondly, it's highly concessional resources at 40 years loan term, including 10 years grace period and 0.4% interest rate. So a grant element of around 60%. However, in order to access this, we had to complete a number of disaster risk reduction policies, and I wish to highlight this across the room. Fiji is in the process of formulating its disaster risk financing policy, which will provide strategic direction for financing intervention across disaster continuum, including insurance in all its forms, whether it's micro or parametric. Anticipatory action, contingency funds, and response and recovery funding. Fiji is also exploring the inclusion of DRR considerations into the disaster risk financing policy to ensure that prevention and mitigation measures are also funded and given due attention. Fiji is also formulating its disaster risk reduction plans at the subnational level in partnership with JICA, in which hazard assessments are conducted for tsunamis, storm surges, earthquake, floods, and landslides. Countermeasures designed off the basis of these hazard assessments are allocated to respective agencies to address. Fiji is also designing its own disaster risk information system using nationally agreed disaster risk indicators and indices. Now, under the new Disaster Risk Management Act, which was recently passed in Parliament, Fiji has also set up a disaster risk management fund, which facilitates all funding earmarked for disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management. Number two, the Fijian government also have the space for catastrophic drawdown option as part of our loans with World Bank. Again, another pre-negotiated option which can be immediately drawn down in the event of a disaster. This is another concessional arrangement. The third thing is we acquired a parametric insurance for the first time with Pacific Catastrophic Risk Insurance Company to cover against cyclone and excessive rainfall. This is a small cover of around $10 million US. Number four, budget contingency for disaster. Now, every budget, we set aside fund to help build up our Prime Minister's Disaster Trust Fund. This is a special purpose trust fund for relief and recovery efforts. Fifth, we are investing heavily in climate adaptation and disaster resilience in our project. For example, we are including climate resilience design in our roads and bridges projects, even though it is expensive, but it has long-lasting impacts and save government from frequent maintenance due to inclusion of climate and disaster resilience component in the design phase. The question I want to put across the room is, what should development partner do? Again, what should development partner do? While we are accessing concessional resources, it's time we get more grants. For example, to expand and scale up our parametric insurance or adaptation projects, etc., we need grants to invest in disaster risk reductions. It's time a dedicated pool of funds is set aside for small island developing states. We need support in areas of capacity development. I'm wearing my hat now as a Pacific Islander. We need support in new technology to help build resilience projects and programs. We need support in knowledge transfer. We need more investment in early warning systems. We also need partners to also assist with private sector financing for disaster resilience programs. So I may not just be the voice of Fiji, but also for the voice for those small island states, developing states. Thank you.
As they say in Fiji, Vinaka. which is basically thank you. So a couple of things there. So I'm standing with, so she mentioned that Fiji is currently developing the disaster risk financing strategy or policy. We are currently the agency, I represent the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, together with the World Bank, ADB, and all the other international organizations and financial institutions are actually collaborating in this effort. But I'm not sure if you actually picked up, there's a couple of issues that are sort of identified. One is actually the back-end loading of disaster risk financing in terms of the contingency planning and putting funds aside. And there's always a dilemma in the ministries of finance when you have to balance, do you invest front-end load, given your physical constraints and capacity and gaps, or do you backload it? And in the case of Fiji, it looks like they put aside a lot of contingency instruments, some of which are nationally led and some of them international, led by IFIs, for example, the KDDOs, the parametric type insurance, and then against that you have the Prime Minister's Special Fund. Really innovative, and I can tell you that in Fiji and the Pacific is actually leading the way in most of the efforts to address the disaster risk through the national budgeting processes. Which brings me to our last panelist, the Honorable Amina Pangandaman, Secretary, Department of Budget and Management for the Government of the Philippines. Thank you for being with us, and really appreciate your being with us and sharing your national government's experiences. So with your extensive experience in the Philippine government, particularly in the budget and fiscal management space, how do you see the role of finance ministries in balancing the need of both disaster response and preventive instruments, especially given the country, the high vulnerability exposure of the Philippines? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I think what's important is that, of course, it was already mentioned a while ago, the fiscal space. All the budget practitioners are always kind of iffy when you talk about the budget and fiscal space, because there's a lot of priority programs and projects that we have to allocate apart from all of these issues that we have now. And we know that acknowledgement of climate change and disaster response is one of those issues that we have to, of course, provide funding. I think what's important is that in the country, funding or strategies for climate change and disaster budget is provided for under our Philippine Development Plan as well. It's Chapter 15 of our Philippine Development Plan, where the public should provide funding for programs and projects to address climate change and disaster response. And apart from that, we also crafted our National Climate Change Action Plan, which also, this is from 2022 to 2028, which also identifies several programs that we have to allocate funding. And if I may share, these are in the areas of food security, water sufficiency, ecosystem environmental stability, human security, climate smart industries, sustainable energy, knowledge capacity development, and cross-cutting interventions. And apart from that, as mentioned by my colleague here from ADB, we have been in our budget process early on in the start of the year. Climate tagging is part of our framework. We ask all national government agencies to tag climate projects. And then further, we disaggregate this into projects between adaptation and mitigation projects. So we're happy to note that since the start of when we tag our climate budget, our budget has been increasing. It has been there for the past 10 years, and it has been increasing. In fact, for 2025 alone, it will be more than double the budget for climate change expenditures. It's now $17.9 billion US dollars from just $8 billion in 2024. It accelerated by 123%. And we're also happy to note that most of the projects are allocated for adaptation purposes. So we're happy that more and more projects that the national government agencies that they propose are through adaptation. But more than that, we also have, just similar to my colleagues here in the stage, we also have provided a project for risk resiliency program, which now reached to 7.2 billion US dollars, a 31.5 increase from 2024 allocation. And also as a part of response, we also have our National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund of 544 million US dollars. And for 2025, our proposed budget, it increased by 51.2% of this year's budget. And I'm glad to note that from its allocation, it was only 2 billion when we concepted the fund. And now it has been increasing, reflecting a whopping 925% increase from the time we started the fund. We also have the Quick Response Fund with $135 million. And that's on a part of the national government. There is also a law which mandates local governments to segregate at least 5% of their revenue to support disaster risk management activities. Now, going back on the framework, I think we also have parametric insurance and the national indemnity insurance, which is now we're pushing to identify strategically important assets against fire, typhoons, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, storm surges, and tsunamis, which is now being handled by the Department of Finance. The Undersecretary is here. I'd just like to note that the Budget Department is separate from the Department of Finance in the Philippines. The Department of Finance raises the money and then we spend the money, just to provide context. Now, I think what's important is to make the budget more sustainable and measurable. My colleague here from ADB here mentioned some tools. We have been working on the climate change expenditures tagging for the last 10 years. However, it was only this year, again, together with Asian Development Bank, that we actually prepared a roadmap for our public financial management reform. And the roadmap includes a chapter on disaster. Let me get the exact. Disaster reduction and management. It is one of the areas of our public financial roadmap, 2024 to 2028. It will harmonize and modernize our public financial system. And under this roadmap, we aim to design and implement classification of tagging systems for disaster-related programs and projects to allow us to track the DRRM budget and the spending performance of agencies, local government units, and government-owned and controlled corporation. It's one note to prepare a budget and another note whether you actually implement and complete the project and whether the project is actually delivering to the needs of the country and our countrymen. So I think that's a new development for the Philippines, and we have already started on that roadmap, on that tool, and hopefully it will help us manage more our budget in a more measurable and sustainable way. There, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Excellent. Please give you a round of applause. Thank you, Honorable. So some really key takeaways from I pick up from your intervention. One is the pre-identified priority programs, the climate budget tagging, and I link them to the M&E of budgets. A lot of financial ministries do and really spend a lot of time on investing in creating the budget allocations. But a more important part is the actual budget monitoring and evaluation, and the link to the budget tagging. Then you can know if your budget has been effective and where you need to increase your investments or reduce your investments. Another point you really made in this is a discussion, and you're the first person I've heard talk about the exponential increase in investment in disaster risk, where we have what has been happening from my observation, and it's part of the discussions, is that exponential risk, but the linear process of allocation. So if you do that process where the exponential risk is obviously increasing, but you have a linear process for allocation, over time, you're actually creating a larger gap in the investments. So it's good to see that you actually exponentially increase your investment as well to try and keep up with the exponential risk. Now, audience, I hope you've taken a lot of information from our panelists, and I'm going to come to you for some questions. We're going to take 4 questions from the audience, and when you ask your question, we have some mics pre-positioned in the middle of the aisle here. If you can please specifically say your question, and if you can state who specifically on the panel you would like to respond to that. Please. I'll ask, okay, the guy sitting next right to the mic, you can stand up, and then you, please, after that. Gentleman there, yeah, with the pink shirt. There's a mic right next to you. I'll take the first one from the back and then come to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ludwig Federigan. I represent Climate Tracker Asia. My question is actually for the DBM Secretary, especially focusing on climate change expenditure tagging. I just wanted to ask, while government, especially the Climate Change Commission, provides the information of the amount of climate change expenditure tagging on an annual basis, is there a way for the same agency to report publicly how much of these tagged budgets come into reality? Because this one is only in the start of the budgeting process. And we know that in government, there are certain time of the year that certain budgets are realigned because they have to do a lot of catch-up plans. How much of the CCET tag, when it has been pronounced, were actually done by the government at the end of the year? That's all.
Okay, okay, we'll get you to respond what is fresh. I wanted to actually take the questions first, and then I'll ask the panelists to respond. So we'll take the questions first. So the first question, obviously, to Honorable Amina from the Government of the Philippines. Second question, please. The lady up the front, please.
Yes. Hello, my name is Priscilla. I'm from Resilience Development Initiative based in Indonesia. So my question would be, as all the panelists, especially the panelists from the Secretary from the Department of Budget and Management in Philippines have mentioned the importance of earmarking part of the local government budget for disaster risk management as well as reduction. What do you think interventions that has been used to incentivize basically local government to allocate proper budget resources that will be actually used for disaster risk management activities? That is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I can just take the discretion of being a moderator, I think those 2 questions can probably be combined. I think they go towards very similar principles. Right? Thanks. I'll go to you, and then I'll go back to the gentleman sitting in the mic. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm Arvin Cara. I'm from START Network here in the Philippines. We've heard of the side of the government, and this is specifically for the DBM Secretary, but also, I know you're following today, but also coming from best practices also from our colleagues in Laos and the Fiji. Because we've heard from the government side, but coming from a whole of society approach in developing resilience, how is risk financing system being coordinated for other agencies, such as humanitarian and development partners outside of the government system? And are there already existing monitoring systems in place for possible gaps and duplications? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Joseph Aquino. I'm from the National Anti-Poverty Commission, Victims of Disasters and Calamities Sectoral Council, the CSO counterpart in the government. My question is within the context of frontliners, community-based organizations. They are not here. They cannot be represented, and by 2030, they should not be left behind. My question is both for the government and the international. And up to the LGUs, the 5%, the 20% development plan, for example, in the Philippines, I'm not sure about other countries, but they are just complied in paper report. But genuinely, they are reported as training in DRR, but actually, they are outing in the beaches. At the international level, it is reported that only 2 to 5% of the global humanitarian fund reach the community based at the local levels. So my question is, what are the gaps in order that by 2030, the surge will not be less than S and we will still earn again 2040? Thank you.
Thank you. We have a little bit of time, so I'm going to give one more person if they have a question. The gentleman standing up already. He's so keen, he's going to run up to the stage. Please ask your question. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of questions, but we have to try and and pick this randomly. Yeah, please.
Thank you. I am Vishnu Baskota from Nepal, and it is the landlocked mountainous country. My question is fire considered as a disaster? Fire. If fire considered as a disaster, and I think it is a disaster, but we are not talking about fire. It can cause severe respiratory illness, and it can cause severe life damages, and it can cause environmental, like global warming, and it can cause the climate changes effect also. Why we are not talking about the fire? It can be happen in urban area, in the jungle, in the environment, all of the area. I didn't saw anywhere. We are not talking about fire. Maybe it can cause us severe illness and climate change effects. What we are thinking, let's do, let's think. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for the questions. And I'm now going to go to the panel, but it seems like a lot of questions were directed to our representative from the government of the Philippines. But I'm going to get to respond to those and also open the floor to our panelists if they want specific to respond to some of those questions. Please, Honorable.
Hello. Welcome to my show. No, for all the questions, we have the same dilemma when I entered the national government. And then I started working on the budget. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that all the budget that we have provided, if you listen to my ending statement a while ago, is that the budget are being measured and to ensure that it's being implemented and committed. So one of the, maybe I can just seg on one of our budget reforms is the use of digitalization. It's included in the PFM roadmap that I mentioned a while ago. We will digitalize our public financial system through a budget treasury management system. The problem right now is that it's difficult to monitor because everything is done manually. So we just ask agencies to submit their budget utilization on a quarterly basis. And most of the time, they're late in the submissions. So we are almost at the last stage of the preparation of our TOR for our digitalization program. And we plan to start this by end of the year, hopefully. And by next year, inshallah, I hope that we'll be able to at least, not just for climate projects, but other social programs of the national government and the infrastructure programs of the national government. We will announce this at a later time, but we will do track the budget and usage, implementation, completion of the projects. And that will include climate change, risk resilience projects, among others. Now, for local government units, I know that I think capacity building, again, it's part of our PFM roadmap. There's a chapter there on capacity building, not only on the national government, but also in the local government units. It's also quite important to actually educate the local government units what kind of programs and projects we should actually fund. I heard a while ago they just go to to the beach and have fun. So I think it's important. So that's why I would like to call on our development and international partners to help us to identify really the specific, if there's a menu out there that we can roll out to our local government units, it will be really of help for them to be able to identify and focus on what projects really that they need. And I'm sure that there are audit teams in the local government units, so that's a nice safeguard. And what else? On fire, I mentioned fire. In our national indemnity program for our asset registration, and fire is part of our insurance program as part of a disaster menu. What else? Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We still have a little bit of time, and I'm going to ask just the panelists just randomly if you want to respond to any of those specific questions before I come back to you for your summing up, please.
Maybe just on the whole of society and CSOs and communities, and this is a very critical aspect, and all the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, the local knowledge, on how to handle and respond to disasters. Oftentimes, in the countries in Asia Pacific, there is a delay in the response, and we talked about the right instruments and the speed and having that, money available. We know the response humanitarian needs, require, but where's the money, right, to fund that? And it's really the local communities that react to that. So in ADB, and it's not just ADB, international financial institutions, especially the multilateral development banks, we are focusing on community-led initiatives and investments. And so one of them is a Community Resilience Partnership program, CRPP. This has many international donors supporting, but it's focusing on the nexus of climate and disaster risk and poverty and gender. And really starting from community experience and ideas to then craft and then pull together programs that we can help implement at the local government and also supported by the central government. So I just wanted to share that example. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tsuru. Any of the other panelists? Maybe our friend from Laos, especially, I think in your previous intervention, you also talked about the local governments and the national governments and some of those interactions. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think thanks for the question on local budget for the disaster risk reduction. I think is the concern that I think raised on the budget monitoring. I think it allows context to ensure that the local governments, local administration can have sufficient funding. We have asked the local governments to allocate the contingency fund, as well as there is a disaster fund at the provincial and district level to ensure the transparency and efficiency and audit. Of course, Ministry of Finance, especially the budget department, request the relevant first-tier budget units to report back on the use of fund and effectiveness of fund. And second one is we have like the Philippines is in experience is that we have the state audit in central and local one. So the state audit can inspect, audit the use of fund for the effectiveness and efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to give the opportunity to our panelist from Fiji, if she has any, I think, to add to the discussions on those questions. Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you, Carlos. I think there was a question in regards to monitoring. For Fiji's case, we've just launched the new FMIS system, the Financial Management Information System. For us, that's actually a milestone achievement for Ministry of Finance. And also there is a tool that we use, not just a tool used for, a tool that is actually introduced within the new FMI system is, there's a talk on climate tagging and budget, gender tagging as well. That is a highlight of anything that's to do with financing. For Fiji's case, I wish to actually highlight that we've also introduced gender responsive budgeting from the budget division. And gender responsive budgeting is actually a tool that we use in this financial year. Now, financial year for Fiji begins from August to July the following year. So it's this August to July next year. That's one financial year. And we've introduced gender responsive budgeting, which actually, with introduced GRB and also with the new FMIS system being in place, that's a huge milestone achievement. And in the room was Mr. Stephen Goldfinch. He came with Mr. Rob Tuck. They work with ADB, and I wish to acknowledge the two gentlemen and Mr. James Lamont, three gentlemen that worked with us, with the Fiji government, on our new PSIP guideline and manual. These, we've adopted this in this financial year, the new PSIP, Public Sector Investment Program Guideline and Manual, whereby climate and disaster and climate resilience component are actually inbuilt in the design template. Like most of us seated here, you know, in order to receive budget for your ministries or agencies, there is a specific submission or proposal template that you would be filling. So we have these main components being inbuilt in our design template. So every ministry will have to fill this component in order to acquire funds from the Ministry of Finance. And this had actually started as well in this financial year. So there's a huge, this for us from the Ministry of Finance Fiji, that's a big highlight achievement, a key milestone achievement when it comes to a DRR. So GRB, gender responsive budgeting, leaving no one behind, and the new FMIS system where gender tagging and climate tagging is actually taken into account. And I think when it comes to monitoring, it's also easier now that we have the new FMI system, and we also have a quarterly monitoring through our gender responsive budgeting tools that we introduced within the budget division. So I think that's it from Fiji. But if anything else, I'm available till Saturday if you wish to raise any question. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we wrap up, I'd also, in response to the CSO's questions, and I think this is something the financial institutions, international financial institutions and partners are also really starting to push through, I know definitely in the Pacific, is adaptive social protection, which is, while you have your normal social welfare protection that countries have within their own frameworks, adaptive social protection is really an additional payment, if you like, in times of disasters. And it linked to, some of you would have been to, I think it's like 3 or 4 sessions this week on anticipatory action. And there's part and parcel of the suite of instruments and processes available through anticipatory action to add in adaptive social protection, especially for the CSOs and NGOs and people who are the most vulnerable communities. I just wanted to add that because I think there's also a discussion it's worth having in terms of addressing risk. At the end of the day, we're all trying to address risk, but at the same time, accelerate development. We cannot separate the risk informed decisions away from development in terms of trying to build people's well-being and improve people's well-being. That is core. In the interest of time, I'm sort of checking the time here, and I know there's some people are looking forward to the closing ceremony. I don't want to hold you up from attending that, but we have a little bit of time. I think we have 5 minutes, 1 each for the panelists and 1 minute for me to wrap up. So I'm just going to go through esteemed panelists. If you just take a minute for key takeaway and a specific message you want to leave with the audience today. I'll start with you, Panompon, and we'll work our way down. Thank you.
I think the national the disaster risk has increasing impact to social and economic landscape. I think we need to work with line ministries. Ministry of Finance alone cannot solve the problem. We need to work with line ministries and central and local governments to first to screen the investment project, expenditures, ensuring that the investment project programs submitted by line ministries is in line with the guidance on the climate resilience. So to ensure that we do not create debt for another constructions, and so I think the quality of investment is the key. Second one, I think we need to develop our local insurance market and bond market to be alternative instrument to in parallel with the government budget. So with this, I really thank for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Miriam? Please, round of applause. Over to you, Miriam.
Thank you, Carlos. For me personally, no man is an island. This is a global village. Okay, this is a global village. Triple P is the way to go. Public, private, partnership. Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Exactly. Before you leave this room, remember, Triple P is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaur?
Yeah, I'm going to echo, PPP, yes, but partnership. Yeah, there's so much knowledge in this room, and we heard from Laos, Fiji, and the Philippines, and there's a value to us coming together like this face-to-face and also virtually, so maintaining the network. There's so much experience. I love the risk layering approach that was explained and matching with the different instruments. I think, Miriama, you mentioned that you're here until Saturday. ADB, we're here, we're based here. So we're not going away. Our DRM expert team is there, so please talk to us. One thing is it's really difficult to convince people to spend money for areas that do not generate return. It's always easier to invest when there is a commercial return, and then it becomes about viability. This is about saving on expenditures later for scenarios that may or may not happen. They're going to happen, but you don't know the magnitude. And so we have to look at the data. We have to share the power of aggregation of data. We have these data lakes, right? Open platform, and we have AI now who can help us identify what data is available and where there are data gaps. Immediately lets us focus funding on addressing those data gaps, and also AI to clean up the data we can plug into existing catastrophe models and do modeling and financial impacts and also economic impacts. So, let's use all these tools available. I mentioned digital twins, so we will come up with with some projects in the Pacific actually to demonstrate the power and support more countries. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, as you know, the Philippines is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. And we have an average of 20 typhoons every year. We are so used to it. Sometimes people rejoice because it just means that we have a free day at home. But the gravity of the effects has been worsening. Well, the last typhoon to hit us is Typhoon Enteng or Yagi. Has an estimated cost of damage to infrastructure of more than $12.4 million US, and damage to agriculture to around $20.5 million US. Super typhoons really hurt us. In September 2022, Typhoon Paeng or Nalgay caused damage amounting to $326.3 million US in 2021. The damage of Typhoon Odette or Rai was at $603.5 million US. That is why on the part of the DBM, the budget department, and together with the economic managers, we have been increasing our disaster response allocation. But we must not only be quick to respond, but we must also be quick to prevent. Like I mentioned a while ago, while the national government and local government units has been providing for climate change, for adaptation, mitigation projects. I think I agree with my colleagues here that private sector will play a very important part on this call. Private sector and our international and development partners help us, not only financially, but in terms of technical assistance, because really, more than anything else, we need access to all of this money that we have now. There's quite huge money there, but we need countries like Fiji and of course the Philippines to get access to all this funding. So there, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Well, as we conclude today's session, I want the audience to please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for sharing their knowledge and experiences with us this evening. I think throughout this hour's discussion, we have seen the challenges that the ministries of finance face in balancing disaster risk reduction when they make budget allocations, in trying to address the critical physical priorities. And I think it's also quite clear that integrating disaster risk into physical policies requires innovative solutions. It requires information, it requires data. It also requires some innovative financing solutions that also both helps with balancing the budgets, but also in terms of addressing the risk going forward, that it should be seen as an investment, not just a sunk cost. That's quite important. And also realizing that the physical planning is a shared challenge. It's not just up to the Ministry of Finance, it's for all of us collectively to input and come to the party in terms of addressing the risks. And I also once again thank you, UNDRR, for making this session possible. And thank you to our esteemed panelists once again. And thank you to audience for being so patient with us. Thank you.